pollster comes to you, maybe they call you, and they ask you, who are you voting for? And you say, Joe Biden. Now, it hurts you to say it. It pains you. It eats away at you a little bit as a man, as a woman. It kills you just a little bit as a person to say so. Now, you don't say that necessarily because you love Joe Biden. It pains you because it's not an affirmative vote. It's a vote entirely because of who Joe Biden is not. Meaning, I am going to vote for Joe Biden entirely because Joe Biden is not named Donald Trump. Now, this is somewhat of a sad, pathetic vote because ultimately, instead of you saying, yes, I'm voting for a man who's going to push for Medicare for all. Yes, I'm voting for a man who's going to eliminate all student debt. Yes, we're going to get that $15 minimum wage. Or, yeah, we're going to expand Social Security for that matter. We have all of these things that we can do as a country to push this country along in a better direction. Yes, we're going to stop these foreign wars. This is what we're going to do as a country. No, that's not the vote you get. The vote you get is, he's not Trump. Now, that doesn't thrill you. That doesn't give you any level of enthusiasm. And if you wake up on the morning of the election, maybe you go vote, maybe you don't. Maybe you assume that other people will carry that burden and other people will vote for your candidate, Joe Biden, and they will put him in office where you don't necessarily have to ascribe your name to that particular vote. You didn't have to take the shameful process of going and pulling the lever for a man that you fundamentally can't stand. What if a lot of you do that? Meaning, what if it's not just a few people who are feeling that way? What if so many people are feeling that way that when pollsters are getting their measurement in regards to who they think is going to win or lose, that it's given somewhat of a false reading? For that matter, what if the person doesn't want to own up to the fact that they're voting for Donald Trump at all? What if the pollsters have a way of going about doing their job that may not necessarily register the voters that are required or that would typically go and actually vote for Donald Trump? What if the measurement is wrong? That's the question. Right now, all of this, Joe Biden winning in spades based on the polling. And if you go into each swing state, one poll for Trump in Wisconsin. What about Florida? Look at this. The best Trump gets in Florida is a tie. What about Michigan? What about Pennsylvania? North Carolina? Arizona. Only one for Trump. North Carolina. Nope, go back. There we are, North Carolina. One for Trump. All of those polls are basically saying Joe Biden is winning in spades. Now, the Democrat from Michigan, Alyssa Slotkin, she's basically saying don't believe those polls. She's saying those polls are giving inaccurate results, quote unquote, and is saying it's somewhat of a false reading, that Trump voters are being undercounted in those polls. And because Trump voters are being undercounted in those polls, this election is closer than what many Democrats believe it is. Now, in her case, it's very specific, and it's very, her focus is very specific, because it kind of has to be. And I said it before, if Trump wins it, I have a hard time believing that Democrats keep the House. If Trump loses it, I have a hard time believing Republicans keep the Senate. Meaning whoever wins it gets all the marbles once again. Meaning you can get Donald Trump that basically has the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court once again. Or you can get Joe Biden with the House, the Senate, and a hostile Supreme Court. Now, if Joe Biden was bright, and what Joe Biden would do is basically try to push through legislation to curb the powers of that court, because that court is a political device just like any other edifice that is in our government. But a very specific point. Slotkin is saying these polls are wrong. If I go into even this, look at this right here. This is by age breakdown. 18 to 34, Biden up 19. 34 to 49, Biden up 14. 50 to 64, Biden up 5. 65 and above, Biden up 21. Now, why is Biden up with the older vote? He's up with the older vote because Donald Trump has been so casual with trying to prioritize the economy over everything else that you get a large section of the elderly generation that is taking the brunt of the COVID-19 issue. If you think of the people that have died, 42% of those people were in nursing homes. And basically 0.1% taking 42% of the brunt of the people that have died. Well, you can imagine under terms like that, where it doesn't necessarily seem like you're taking a disease that is specifically deadly to the elderly population seriously, you can see that they may have feelings about that. It also goes into this notion of racial stuff. Right here, look at this. This is Monmouth. 62% say Donald Trump's handling of the protests has made the situation worse compared to 20% that's made it better. This poll is really fucking fascinating. And I'm going to get into this poll in another video by itself because it is extraordinary in the way that they're asking questions. Because you have some polls that, like, I may ask you something and you may answer me. Now, what do I think that answer means versus what you think that answer means is the world of difference. And because that world of difference, I may not necessarily entirely understand what you're trying to get across in your answer. So sometimes when you ask questions in the polling, if the questions are written in a certain way, it helps you get to what the person actually is trying to say. Because sometimes you have things that don't necessarily seem to go in line with one another, and there's contradictions in it that gives it, you can say, life and color, and gives it a certain degree of clarity that wouldn't have necessarily been there otherwise. This is one of those polls. It's fascinating. But again, critical of Donald Trump. Here's another one. This one is tangentially critical. National protests. How many people think the actions are justified? 30% says fully justified. 17% thought that way in June. That means there was like a 13-point jump over the course of a month. 35% say partially justified. It was 37% in June. 2% decline, but again, the fully justified jumped all the way up by 13 points. 29% said not at all. Now, earlier in June, that was 38%. Meaning, as the protests are going on and as Donald Trump is, screaming bloody murder, that they're writing Black Lives Matter out of his thing, the public itself acknowledges the protests and say it was either partially or fully justified by the tune of like 70% or 60-something percent. That number, again, has gone up significantly over the course of a month. The anger justified, that number has gone down. But from the standpoint of whether people believe that the protests are correct or that the protests have some level of value, the people say yes. Donald Trump does not think that. He is running counter to what the public is thinking on this stuff. The thing is, though, that I have to be honest, Slotkin may be right. I mean, I think the polls are what the polls are with Donald Trump. This is Slotkin from Michigan. And I'll just read what she said first. Democrat Alyssa Slotkin, first-term member who represented the district President Trump won by roughly 7 points in 2016, said the polling showing a president trailing former Vice President Joe Biden are inaccurate. I don't believe it, Slotkin told Political Magazine when asked about the most recent polls showing Biden performing well in key swing states, such as Michigan. 535 currently has Biden nearly 10 points ahead of Trump in Slotkin's state of Michigan. The former CIA analyst said there are too many variables for the polls to be accurate to reflect what's going to take place in November. Listen, if anyone tells me that they can accurately predict what major events are coming in the remainder of 2020, I'll give them $1,000, Slotkin said. I mean, this has been a year of black swans. I don't for 1 minute think that this presidential race is safe in any ways column. I've been literally begging people to ignore those polls. They are a snapshot in time, and if 2020 has taught us anything, it's that we have no idea what's coming next. She's right. Donald Trump could, he has the powers to do so, turn on a dime and say, I'm going to make sure the public is safe. I'm going to prioritize getting rid of the illness or the virus first. I'm going to make sure that people get health care for free, meaning Medicare for all who have anything related to the coronavirus. Yeah, he could do those things. He could push for those things. He could probably even control the Republican Senate to, in some way, accept those things. But he's not. And that's the rub. Something could happen that makes Donald Trump seem more presidential within the remaining time period. But he's been availed by two disasters. And in those two disasters, he has fucked up royally. It's one thing if he handled these two well. I don't necessarily know what other disaster that could befall us that Donald Trump is going to somehow show out in so well that is going to overshadow these other two events. But look, I'm not saying it's not possible. It is possible. It is also very possible that the polling that has taken place may be undercounting his voters. I don't take that away from that at all. So I guess you could judge for yourself, right? And I suppose we can see in November. I've given my assessment that I think outside of something happening that Donald Trump changes the momentum of this thing, if Donald Trump goes into those three debates, because Joe Biden didn't want to have many, but if he goes into those three debates, and the only thing happens is that Joe Biden and him draw, meaning Trump is not able to lay a glove on him, or Trump is not able to make Joe Biden look so utterly and obscenely ridiculous that putting Joe Biden in the presidency just seems like, whoa, we can't do this. This guy's lost it. Unless that happens, Joe Biden's strategy is to coast. Now, her point is, don't do that. Don't make that assumption. I would agree with her. If your job is to win the presidential election and you really want to win it and it's the highest priority over everything else and your name is Joe Biden, you support Medicare for all. You support the elimination of student debt. You appropriate the qualities that Sanders had. You bring Sanders into your administration. You do all that stuff. And you coalesce a organization of your party and you go and win it. And you win it thoroughly when people can make that affirmative vote of this is the person who I'm voting for, because even though my guy lost, at the very least, this guy is appropriating policies from the guy who I was supporting, even if it's not everything I wanted. Joe Biden is not doing that. In fact, he's doing the opposite of that. And so they're not going to listen to her. They should listen to her. They're not going to listen to her. And even if there's some variance in the polling that Trump's voters are being undercounted, I think that needs to be taken credibly. And in taking that credibly and not assuming that the only thing you need to do is coast from here on out, which it seems that's what Joe Biden's policy is. I'm going to write it out in my basement. Slotkin, Michigan, giving good advice. Will anyone listen? Like, share,